Talk about warming temperatures now, because the rapid decline of Switzerland's glaciers was laid bare this week after a new report showed that they'd lost 3% of their ice in the last year alone.
Yes, it suggests that many of the country's smaller glaciers won't survive our current level of warming, but scientists hope that rapid action could help to preserve what is left. Our climate reporter, Mark Pointing, has more.
The iconic mountain landscapes of Switzerland are changing before our eyes. This is Rhône Glacier in 1919. Here it is today. Where once there was thick ice, there is now a lake. Dramatic changes at Rhône Glacier and Morteratsch Glacier too. And at the largest alpine glacier of them all, the Great Aletsch. What was once frozen is now trees.
Certainly a sense of sadness, because I love the mountain, I love the glaciers. So as a person, I feel sad when I see this appearance, this change. But on the other hand, it's also a really fascinating time as a scientist.
Switzerland's glaciers were roughly stable between 1950 and the early 1980s. Since then, they've lost almost half of their ice. UN scientists say the main reason for the rapid reductions in glacier ice worldwide over the past few decades is clear. It's human-caused climate change. Imagine this staircase is our valley. Here's our glacier. Higher up, it's colder. That's where ice is made from snowfall. Lower down, it's warmer. That's where most of the melting happens. In a stable climate, the ice gained roughly balances the ice lost. But in our warming climate, the melting outpaces the snowfall. That's why we see glaciers shrinking around the world.
In the historical records, of course, there have really been massive changes. The glaciers in the Alps, they covered essentially the Alps and went way into Germany. So the glaciers have been much, much larger. But what we see now is really massive changes within a few years. And we know we can attribute much of it to anthropogenic climate warming. So it's really human-made.
The disappearance of glaciers adds to global sea levels and threatens the water supplies of millions of people around the world. And while many smaller glaciers won't survive our current level of warming, scientists are crystal clear that sharp cuts to carbon emissions can still save much of the world's ice and preserve at least some of these pristine mountain views. Mark Pointing, BBC News.
Well, we can now speak to Professor Ben Matzion, a climate scientist at the University of Bremen in Germany. It's very good to have you with us. Do you think there's a danger that we are entering a world in which all glaciers could disappear?
Well, it depends on which mountain range you look at. For the Alps, we are certainly close to that possibility that all ice disappears. But if you're thinking of, for example, high mountain Asia, some of the mountains are so high that there will be a little bit of ice left, even if the world warms by, let's say, 3 or 4 degrees.
And so what would the impact be for nature and indeed for us as individuals?
Well, I would say mostly there are 2 impacts. One is sea level rise. So sea level is already rising quite quickly and it will accelerate over the next couple of decades. Of course, depending on how much CO2 we emit. And a lot of that sea level rise is coming from melting ice in the mountains. And the second really important thing is seasonal water availability. So there are some regions in the world where during summertime, when it's really dry and warm, most of the water is really coming from the ice that is melting during summer. You know, ice that was accumulated in the glaciers centuries ago and now providing water for agriculture, industry and households.
And Ben, it can be hard to get a sense of the scale of this. We mentioned that this report has shown that Switzerland's glaciers have lost 3% of their ice in the past year. How worrying is that for you?
Well, it's very worrying, I would say. You know, Switzerland is extreme in that sense that 3% per year is a lot compared to what is happening elsewhere in the world. But we now are actually in a state where the globe is really losing ice everywhere. So no matter where you look, everywhere the glaciers are melting, and that is quite worrying.
And how much of this is something that we as people can reverse? I mean, is it inevitable?
To some degree, it's already inevitable. And the reason for that is that glaciers are responding with a lag to climate change. So the glaciers are now responding to CO2 that we emitted decades ago, let's say 50 years ago, and they are still responding to that. And they will keep responding to the CO2 that we are emitting right now. But we are also seeing that there's a very strong and clear relation between the amount of CO2 we emit and the amount of ice that remains in the mountains. We just have to be quite patient to see the results when we are really cutting carbon emissions.
And presumably the action we take can halt the disappearance or slow the melting of the glaciers, but presumably does it get to a point where it could be too late if once they've gone, because presumably it's impossible for them to sort of reform?
Well, I mean, it's not completely impossible for them to reform, but we really would have to cool down the climate for that. It's not enough to just stop global warming. We really would have to make it cooler than it is right now to actually have them regrow. And I don't really see that happening.
OK. Professor Ben Matthias, climate scientist at the University of Bremen in Germany, thank you very much.
Thank you.